Well, thank you all so much for letting me come and speak today. I'm so honored that you asked me to come and tell a little bit about our story. And so thanks for your time. I know it's Friday night, so you guys should be out partying or something. But according to Hunter, that's not done. And I hope I'm not the first person in this office to wear a tie.
I don't know about that.
My name is Scott Norton, and I started a company called Sir Kensington's Gourmet Scoop Ketchup, which you just tried over there. Did you guys like it?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the right answer. Okay, so go to the next slide.
Oh, cool.
So does anyone know what's in ketchup?
Tomatoes.
Sugar.
Corn syrup.
Okay, so corn syrup is definitely an ingredient. Vinegar, definitely an ingredient. And tomatoes are in ketchup in the form of tomato concentrate. And I think you guys are the fastest to answer that question of any audience. There are a few other things, but they're not super important. And how did we go to create a ketchup like this that we eat that's omnipresent in our culture? And let me tell you a little bit about the story of ketchup and what ketchup used to be, so you can go to the next slide. So the word ketchup is actually a Chinese word. It comes from a Chinese dialect in Fujian province. And the history of ketchup starts about 500 years ago in the late 16th century. And it was in coastal China where they started to ferment fish and add salt to it and use that as a kind of seasoning to put on food. And this spread to places like Indonesia and Malaysia, and this sauce, which was kind of like a fish sauce called ketchup, became really interesting to the Dutch and Indonesian men of the European empires. And so they brought this back to England and to Europe, basically, as a result of the kind of spice trade. And they got really interested in it. And they started to make ketchups in Europe that kind of approximated this taste profile that was salty and that had the savory component, but they didn't really know how to cure fish the right way, so they would make it with oysters, they made it with mushrooms, they made it with a bunch of different things. And it wasn't until the Spanish discovered the tomato on the plains of the Atacama Desert in Peru and brought that back to Spain, shared it with the Italians, that the tomato was incorporated into ketchup. Next slide. And so now, today, it was in this time in the 1600s in Europe that they started to add tomatoes into ketchup, and that spread to the New World in the 1700s, and then through the 1800s, it became a staple in the New World, in the colonies, and on the prairie. And that tomato ketchup is something that has developed into a taste that we all know today. We'll go to the next slide. And ketchup became very popular because tomatoes are something that spoil very easily. They grow during the summers and they're harvested in the late summer, early autumn. And so you couldn't enjoy them for the vast majority of the year. So what people did was they saw ketchup as a way to preserve tomatoes, and it got really popular. So back in the day, before the Second World War, or even before the First World War, there were lots of different ketchups out there. So as you can see here, there's Blue Label tomato ketchup, there's Brooks's ketchup, there was Heinz ketchup, there were all these different ketchups. If you go to the next slide. And they all used something called sodium benzoate. And it was sodium benzoate that was actually discovered to cause terrible birth defects. And sodium benzoate was the reason for America's Pure Food and Drug Act, which is the reason why today, along with sort of the work of Upton Sinclair and what they did with the meatpacking districts and the kind of exposés there, why today you have to put the ingredients of a food on the side of that food's package. So it used to be that you could just say ketchup and sell it, and you wouldn't have to say it was in it. Just as you could say if it was tinned ham, there's probably all number of things in there. But with the Pure Food and Drug Act, you couldn't put anything in it that wasn't on the label, and you could only use a certain amount of sodium benzoate. And so what happens when something like this, next slide, is considered poison, is that people adapt. Next slide. And it was Heinz, H.J. Heinz, that actually took the lead in adding more vinegar and more salt to ketchup to do what sodium benzoate did, which was preserve it. And this was an interesting change because he was really the first person to do this, but what it did was that it brought the flavors of tomato ketchup in balance more. And so ketchup is one of the few foods that we eat that has all 5 basic tastes: sweet, salty, bitter, sour, and can anyone name the last? And umami, also known as savory. Which is essentially glutamate, which is the key flavor of fermented fish and the key flavor in mushrooms, key flavor in asparagus. And actually, tomatoes have a lot of that umami, savory flavor. And that's what MSG is. So this balance of flavor, this is what made ketchup really take off. So now it was safe for you, it tasted incredible, it was well balanced, and next slide. And that's why today we have all these different types of mustards, but because this ketchup has been so popular with people, there's only been one of those. Next slide. And so we got really curious of why is it that there were all this different choice in condiments. There's, you can pick from any variety of milk fat. Now, when you go to the supermarket, there's soy milk, there's almond milk, there's rice milk, there's all sorts of milk. But in ketchup, there's really only one. And yeah, it's a great flavor, but it doesn't really explain why there's so many different options, or why there's no options in ketchup. So we got really curious about this, my friend and I, about 4 years ago. And we thought to ourselves, well, maybe Heinz has stumbled across the perfect formula, but more likely there's probably some kind of opportunity here. There's probably some way where we can create something that's definitely called ketchup, but is different than this thing that is, less really being American. I mean, it's sort of almost like Soviet Russia. It's high fructose corn syrup. It's the same thing in every supermarket. It has no identity. It's the lowest common denominator. I mean, what is this thing that we call the American condiment that represents nothing about our country? And so we started thinking about, okay, how could we do this in a way that was compelling? And so we created this brand first, and we called it Sir Kensington's Gourmet Scooping Ketchup. And we put invitations in all our friends' mailboxes back at Brown for a ketchup party, a ketchup tasting party. And people thought we were out of our minds. And if you go to the next slide, what we did is we started by saying, look, we know that there's probably some opportunity here, but we're not chefs, and ultimately we're not ketchup experts. So what we can do is we can understand what ketchup is, make a bunch of different ketchups that have the values that we share, which is that we want it to be all natural, we want it to be interesting and compelling in the way that it was high quality, in the way that it had this kind of new brand. It was postmodern in a way. And we wanted to have a texture that was more reminiscent of higher quality gourmet foods, like a tapenade or a jam, or like a textured European mustard. So we created 8 different ketchups, and we did a blind tasting at this party. It was jacket required, and we served people Kir Royale, and we gave them little dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets. And Belgian frites and waffle fries, kind of stuff like this. And so we put these 8 different ketchups out there, and next slide. We gave everyone scorecards, and we let them score it on a number of different criteria. How did it taste? What was the texture like? How flexible was it with food? How similar was it to Heinz? And we asked people for their comments. And then the next slide. We let them kind of go to town and have fun. And we found that there were 2 ketchups that people really liked. From that, we did some analysis on the data, both qualitative and quantitative, and we found that it was what you see now, which is the classic and the spiced. Those were the winners. So we sort of said, okay, now we're at this point where we've got this classic and the spice, and we seem to have kind of a critical mass going, so why don't we try and make this ketchup and put it into jars and see what we can do with that. And at the time, we had no idea what it meant to put anything in a jar. We had to learn about the hot filling process. We had to learn how to sterilize the glassware and all the equipment. And as you can see here, we had to coat my entire kitchen and also myself with plastic wrap because the pots would sputter and burn us and give us what we called Kensington kisses.
Is that a trash bag that you were in?
That's a trash bag, yeah. So if you go to the next slide. And then we sort of spent a lot of time, we drove across the state, we went to Springfield, Massachusetts, and we bought like the absolute minimum order of square jars, these jars that we wanted. We designed the labels by hand, and we put all our friends to work labeling our ketchup jars. And we threw a party, and the party sold out. And we gave everyone ketchup, and we let them listen to some electronic music from a DJ that was a friend of ours, and it was a big success. And people, they said, "This is great. I really like this." And over the past 2 years, we have been running this as a business. But before then, from when we graduated Brown and said, okay, we're sort of going to put this on ice, we were both working in the business world, and we were incubating this project. And that sort of year and a half brought us to this product that we have today. So how did we go from making this product in our kitchen and throwing a party and printing the labels in an inkjet printer and getting people really excited to the product that we have today, which is sold in about 2,000 retail stores across the country and served in about 75 different hospitality establishments like the Four Seasons Hotel and the Breslin and a bunch of other nice restaurants. How do we do that? And so this is talking a little bit about that process. Next slide. So the first is really product, and this is sort of just a more informational piece so you know what the qualitative differences are. So on the left here you have the ketchup that you've had all your life, and then on here you have the ketchup that you had this evening. And as you can see, there's a difference in the texture, and that's because we use whole tomatoes instead of tomato concentrate. So that was really important to us, was using those whole ingredients. Instead of onion powder, we use real diced onions. We use olive oil, agave nectar, honey, and raw sugar to sweeten it instead of high fructose corn syrup. So that's the product. But the product doesn't really, there are a lot of great products out there, but that doesn't really move things. That doesn't get people excited. We realized that we needed a way to get people really interested. And so we thought about how do we communicate the fact that this is a ketchup for people that want to approach life differently, that know that there's always something better. And so we started to think about the brand and kind of what Sir Kensington represents, and we felt that it was a very personal thing for us. And so in order to communicate this to the people that we worked with, we needed to communicate visually. So we put together a whole bunch of materials. Like here's all this kind of stuff that we thought about just in terms of the look and feel. If you go to the next slide, here's a bunch of stuff we put together in terms of what we want our kind of graphic identity, a brand, to look like. And the next slide, we thought about packaging. How do we be innovative but familiar, and how do we make this really jump off the shelf? And also, how do we make it fun? So doing things like the mustaches, making it fun to interact with, and creating this character of Sir Kensington, who's sort of feels like this 19th century industrialist, but is educated at Oxford and Cambridge, and he studied some different financial engineering and went to Turkey, Constantinople for the Queen of England, and wrote his thesis on Ionian chutneys and other spiced sauces. If we had started a technology catch-up, then he probably wouldn't have finished at Oxford, but that's another story. And so what we have today is now through communicating that brand to the people that we work with, because we can't do everything ourselves. We need to work with someone to design the label. We need to work with someone to manufacture. We need to work with someone to build the website. And unless you communicate very clearly to the people that don't share your mind space and communicate them in a clear way, then you're not going to get something that you feel really proud of. And so I wish I could say that once you launch the product, then business just is at a breakaway pace from there. But I think particularly what talking to Hunter yesterday and sort of thinking about what you guys are doing here at Lore, I've got a good idea of the basic idea and the problem that you're trying to solve. And I wanted to specifically talk about the next slide, which is habits, and what habits mean, and how habits are, in my opinion, the single biggest force of inertia when it comes to innovation. And we put a ketchup out there that on paper it's got half the sodium, it's got half the sugar, it wins taste tests, It's won awards, and it's pretty much, when we show it to chefs, they almost universally think it's superior to the ketchup that they know, Heinz. But people worry. People worry, will my customers reject this? People worry, is this worth the price? People, they create all these different hang-ups in their head, and a lot of it is purely illogical. It's about, is it worth the mental energy to shift and to change? And so we spend a lot of our time thinking about how to make it easy for the people around us that we're trying to convince to say yes. And as I'm sure all you guys know, your role as an innovator and as a startup is to figure out how to get people to say yes. So how to get people to say yes. I'll give you a little bit of attention, or I'll give you a little bit of resources, I'll give you a little bit of money, or I'll give you a little bit of time. And habits are a big piece of that. And if you understand how to make it easy for people to break their own habits, which deep down they actually want to do, because the whole reason you're going to them is because they share your values, and you know that. So how do you do that? Well, the first thing that we've learned is you have to, and maybe you guys are familiar with this, and a lot of this is probably obvious to you guys, is you have to start with the innovators. You have to start with the people that are the easiest to reach and the people that can reach the most people. And so we look at this in a way that this is sort of the value of reaching certain people. And at the beginning stage here, you have the innovators, and then finally you have the laggards. And so, the quick way to think about this is, these are the people here that waited in line for the first iPhone, and these are the people here that will buy the iPhone 5, and that will be their first Apple phone. And if you can reach these people as a brand, they're the ones that are going to do your marketing for you. They're the ones that are going to say, I take it upon myself to find cool stuff and share it with my friends or with my business colleagues. And so your resources are best spent here. But you've got to obviously go up the curve, and that's why here you see it's sort of, it's more important to reach these early adopters, because innovators, they're going to find something new and they're only interested in what's new. Whereas the people that are really in this space that are going to be there to stay are the people that learn about it slightly after them. And so you've got to have a really crisp idea about what an innovator looks like in your demographic. Who is the person that you're trying to reach? So this here, there's a brand, a squash brand from the 70s called Boast, and it was recently resuscitated by Partners in Spade, which is Andy Spade's company. He helped start Kate Spade and Jack Spade. And so this is a piece that they did. They brought the brand back, and this is how they take on a big part of their market, which is late 20s, early 30s, and the type of culture that this person consumes, how they think about themselves in the great universe of status, class, taste, all that kind of thing. And so you've got to have a really good idea of who you're speaking to, because if you have a general idea, then you'll come up with a product that suits the average, and that's not acceptable to the early adopter. The other really important thing is it is infinitely easier to piggyback on people's existing behaviors than it is to change their behaviors. So I'll give, and the reason I put this is it's about piggybacking, but it's also about brushing your teeth. So brushing your teeth is part of your routine. You don't brush your teeth at 3 p.m. one day and then 7 p.m. the next day and then noon the next day. You brush it at a certain time. It's part of how you wind up in the morning and you wind down at night. My girlfriend would tell you that I'm not so good at this particular routine. But brushing your teeth is an example of this. And what companies like Procter & Gamble will do is they'll spend millions of dollars in things like Dove, Gillette. They'll follow people home and they'll try and understand how they operate. And they'll do a thing called Day in the Life. Does anyone know a researcher named Jan Chipchase? I highly suggest you look this guy up. He used to work for Nokia's design and innovation lab before they, stopped making phones that people want. But his job, he was charged for figuring out how to sell phones to the next billion people on the planet, and so he would constantly just be spending his time in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America, and he would be understanding how people use cell phones, how they repair them in informal networks, how they're using them for things in Africa, like using them as ATMs or money exchange networks. And he would do these kind of studies to understand what people's habits were. In our business, what this means is I go to a restaurant and I need to make it as easy for them to switch as possible. So I need to make my ketchups in the exact same the exact same sizes that they're buying Heinz in. And I need to do it in a way where the training on the staff is minimal. They don't have to change the way they set the table. They don't have to serve it with a spoon. They don't have a different cleanup. They don't have a different setup. They don't have a different refrigeration methodology. Because if you ask someone to do anything more than say yes, the entire thing will fall apart. And so it's very important to understand what people's existing behaviors are and capitalize on those. And just speaking to Hunter briefly, it sounds like there's a big component of Laura that's basically just functional, kind of a file sharing, and there's a piece of it that's also social. It's about integrating. And an easy way to gain a new user is to say, you're already using this product for this purpose, not necessarily for both of them, and Laura has this purpose, so just replace it with that, and then we can go from there. And that's your Trojan horse. So it's really important to think about what is your Trojan horse that allows you to piggyback on that existing behavior, get someone's mind share, and then fall out from there. Because once I've made it easy for that customer and they've said yes and I'm working with them on a ketchup, it's so much easier for me to sell them a mayonnaise, for example, or for me to give them consulting services on the restaurant or anything like that. And so making it easy for the customer is very important. The next thing is that you've got to have a carrot and a stick. You have to incentivize people. So even if you're making it easy for them, it's still harder than just doing what they're doing already. Because the people that you're talking to you, it's the most important thing in the world. But to them, it's like a total administrative detail. It's a pain in the ass. They've got all these people that are emailing them. They've got like their wife at home who's wondering like, what's for dinner? And you're like, oh, this thing is gonna change education. And they're like, yeah, right. So you've gotta figure out how to incentivize them. You've gotta figure out what does this person want at this moment? And you've gotta appeal to them in that way. So, with us, the way that we talk and approach a retailer, the pitch is gonna be completely different than a hotel versus a restaurant versus someone who's doing the demos for us at a store. You've got to find out what incentivizes people, and you've really got to put that first, because the what's in it for me is super important. And the final one is simplicity, and this goes along with all of those things. It's simplicity and it's focus. It's really do one thing and do it well, and when you present it, make it extremely easy to digest. It's got to be completely idiot-proof. It can't have too many bells and whistles, and this is something that I think in ketchup is much easier to do because we create one thing and we focus on one thing and we do it well, and we don't have this thing called features. We just have a product. Really. But when you talk about all the features that you want to add, you have to ask yourself, if all my features were fighting to stay in and only a few could remain, would this one win the fight? You've always got to be asking that. And that's true in your communications with people, it's true in your materials, and it's true in the product itself, is you've got to stay simple and you've got to stay focused, because otherwise people will get confused and bored and they'll lose your attention.
Is it like the different flavors of ketchup kind of features? Like spice versus
Yes,
classic?
we do have 2 flavors of ketchup, spiced and classic. But there's a reason why we don't say things like gluten-free or non-GMO on the label. And we keep it to 2 flavors, not necessarily 6. And this really, it's more about, what I mentioned earlier about piggybacking on those existing behaviors and keeping it simple in that way, than it is about, what the flavors are. But you'll find that in describing, like when I describe the ketchup, I could say 10 things about it, but I know that people are only going to hear 3, so I stick to 3. So that's kind of how I approach simplicity. Next slide. And so, that's my 2 cents and my experience about innovation offline. And so hopefully you guys enjoy the ketchup, and we brought a bunch of little mini jars for you, so you can take those home or bring them to a restaurant. And on our website, you can find where to get the ketchup and We're in a number of restaurants as well. And I'll give you all a coupon if you're interested.
All right.
So, I'm hoping there's some questions for you guys.
One of the things is, you brought up was, like, you have to like meet expectations. People, for example, you have like the mother that wants to buy ketchup for her kids, and
Right.
she knows Heinz, she knows whatever. If you show it to her and you do the taste test, like she might say your ketchup's better, but at the same time, her kids expect, what do they put on their hot dogs, for example? So when, walking down the aisle, what do you think? This is, I guess, part of like how do you get in the mind of the customer? What do you think when she sees your product? What do you think she thinks, and then how do you take advantage of her perspective? Because that's like, I would assume, a huge part of the market.
Yeah, no, that is our retail market, is mothers buying for their families. And so just to boil it down, you're saying how do you take an uninformed shopper and turn them into a customer?
Well, because she knows what she knows that from Heinz she expects something and she'll get that, and when she sees your product, what do you think she expects, and what do you want her to expect? Okay,
so there's two pieces to this. The first is about, you say, when she sees your product.
Right.
As if it's sort of like if someone's typing in a bunch of random characters in the address bar of Internet Explorer and they come across your website. The hard part is actually being seen. So first, you've got to find a context where it's more visible than other ketchups. So in our business, this is about getting an end cap placement, or it's about getting what's called a shelf talker, which is a little thing that says, this is bloody good ketchup. And that has very interesting, like some sort of this is ketchup made from real tomatoes, or this is half the sugar and half the sodium, or it's being in their flyer, or something like that, or a demo is a great way to do that. And so number one is you've got to be visible. You've got to stick out like a sore thumb. Because when people, this goes back to habits, when people are in the supermarket and are walking down the aisle, everything in the aisle is an autopilot purchase. So they're in the aisle and they're like, I'm going to the ketchup aisle, I'm looking for ketchup, and they go and they see all the different ketchups and they're all in the same shape, and they grab it and they go. And what we do to be seen when we can't do those things that relate to context is we create our packaging in a way to look very different and appeal to the early adopter. Appeal to the person that's saying, oh, that looks interesting, let me try that. And really try and impute the values of the ketchup with the packaging. So by putting it in a smaller jar, we use glass, not plastic, and we use a square jar with a wide mouth and call it scooping ketchup, whereas the other ketchups, they all use the same iconic jar, or iconic bottle. And while theirs is American, ours is British. And all the other natural ketchups have a big tomato on them, and we don't have a big tomato on ours. So immediately someone can say, okay, this is different, and it looks kind of highbrow, and that's for me. What we're running into, though, is that works with a very small segment of the market, and it works very well. So we're in the process of moving down market when we start to work with places like Target and Safeway and Stop and Shop, and we're working with a design firm that's going to help us be able to communicate ketchup better than we do now, which right now we kind of communicate like a really nice gift item or a luxury product or something like that. But to really impact people's lives, the 300 million out there, we have to communicate ketchup better. So you have to think very carefully about what your package is saying. And then, if someone gets to the point where they pick up the package and they're actually considering the purchase, you've got to signal with price. So you have to be at a price where, people are going to say, okay, this is going to be worth it for what I'm getting. And you also have to put something on the package to say, this is how it relates to other ketchups. For example, it has less of the sodium and less of the sugar, and if they flip it over, they can clearly tell that all the ingredients are natural, and it says all natural. So basically, it's about placement and positioning that drives perception, and it's about the messaging on the actual product. Other than that, in the store, there's not really that much you can do.
So, one of the unique parts of like selling a consumer food item, like a condiment, is that there are tons of different distribution points, right? So there's different types of places. So at the consumer level, you've got supermarkets and you're selling direct to the mom, but then you can go to like a one-off cool restaurant in Manhattan, like Breslin, but then you can get a chain and then you can get like Yankee Stadium, and there's all different types of things. And what's nice is if you get a restaurant, you can like force it on the people who go to that restaurant. They're exposed to that brand. They associate Sir Kensington with the restaurant's brand. But where do you start? Like, what was the focus getting going? Because there are so many different sides to start at.
Good question. Well, we started really where the barriers to entry were the lowest, and again with the early adopters. And so that for us meant retail, and it meant independent shops. So our first account was Murray's Cheese, which is on Bleecker Street. You guys know Murray's?
Yeah.
So they're like very open. Like they have a huge like aging cave below. They're the buyer there is great, and they said yes. And then we started to work with Chelsea Market Baskets, and then Dean and DeLuca picked us up, and then Williams-Sonoma picked us up, and then we started working with Whole Foods. So we started working first with like specialty one-off shops like that, and then going to retail chains, and then going to one-off nice restaurants, and now we're finally at the place where we're selling to chain restaurants and chain hotels.
Right.
So you kind of have to think about, well, what is the early adopter value of this customer, or like what I'll call like the sneeze value, like how much are they going to tell other people?
Right.
And you have to think about positioning-wise, how much is this going to show that it is a high-quality product? So going to Dean and DeLuca, people see, oh, you're in Dean and DeLuca, that means something.
But you're saying that you started with the retail level because it was the lowest barrier to entry.
Because it's easiest to sell into.
But also I would imagine that you consider like really what you're making is a brand more than anything else, right? Like,
Correct.
Because basically the message is that like the product is essentially like a commodity. There are different parts of it, but the brand is what's going to make, like anyone else can make Sir Kensington ketchup if they wanted, right?
I mean, I would put it to you to try. It's not a commodity like Heinz is a commodity. It's not like there's a store brand ketchup, there's an all natural ketchup, there's a Whole Foods ketchup, there's a Wegmans ketchup, and they're all pretty much like Heinz. Our ketchup is very different.
So that's actually my second point. Do you think that you could have just like repackaged Heinz with the?
Yes, and I think that I would have gotten very far, but not nearly as far as we've gotten. You could just take something and slap a better package on it, but that's not going to drive cultural change.
Does that integrity?
Well, certainly it doesn't have integrity, but it doesn't have the ceiling of customer adoption of being truly different. I wouldn't be able to attract the talent that I attract. I wouldn't be able to attract the high-end customers that I attract. Do you know Rocket Internet? It's a long story, I'll tell you about that. But I mean, it would be like, what's a good example? It'd be like what Tommy Hilfiger is now,
Right.
which is just like something that used to be interesting, which is just, these commodity clothes made for the cheapest price and marketed to the masses, but, just meant to look cool.
So to that point, in your point about your brand moving down market now, were
Yeah.
you, I guess
Well, let's call
initially,
it's moving mainstream.
moving mainstream, sure. I guess initially, several years ago when you were first creating this brand, were you worried about being sort of too highbrow, limiting sort of your mass appeal? And
We
then-
were too naive to be worried about that.
Okay. And then sort of as a corollary to
Yeah.
that now, as you do become more mainstream, how do you still maintain, when you're trying to have this premium brand and be in high-end restaurants and everything, don't you lose sort of that value when it then is everywhere? Like if part of your brand is being exclusive, how do you also be mainstream?
Two parts of that. We're lucky because our competitor sells everywhere from the Four Seasons and Whole Foods to Walmart and Food for Less. So we're always going to be better than Heinz in that respect. More importantly, we did a very good job of solidifying the relationships, the positioning, the press that we had in the very high end, but you can't go the other way around. So you can't be like a normal brand and go up to Dean and DeLuca, but you can start at Dean and DeLuca and Williams-Sonoma, and then you can work downwards. And there are going to be trade-offs. I think less so in the restaurants, but if Williams-Sonoma is like, I can't compete with Target on your price, that's fine because Williams-Sonoma is like a sliver of Target's volume. And so that's an okay trade-off.
Were you inspired by the Malcolm Gladwell article?
Yes, very inspired by that.
Is that what started? Was that before?
That was before we started all this stuff, and that was, I think, from 2006. We started in 2008.
Yeah.
I actually met today with the guy that Malcolm Gladwell works with in that article, Howard Moskowitz.
This is the guy who tried the Diet Pepsi, or
Yeah, he develops flavors for companies.
He was like
He
the
created
sauce.
like all the different sauces with
Right,
Prego.
right.
This guy is like a ridiculous character.
huh?
The ketchup kind of.
So
Yeah, you can send it out to.
it was a brilliant article, but it was it was why do we have one ketchup, right? Like it was the
Yeah.
and, but with every with mustards you got tons of variety with sauces. And,
Yeah.
So that was like a big.
Yeah, and actually the last day that we bottled those 200 jars back in Providence, I hadn't slept in days, and I had this terrible toothache, and I was like walking to the like emergency room to get medicine, and I ran into Malcolm Gladwell on the street. Yeah.
Province?
Yeah, and I like met him, and then I emailed him the next day, being like, "We're throwing this ketchup party. Like, I'm such a putz for not mentioning this when I met you." And he responded, and he was like, "You're not a putz at all. Like, this is great, you know." And I ran into him again in New York, and I happened to have ketchup on me at the time, and I'm like, "I met you 4 years ago, and here's some more ketchup." So Malcolm Gladwell has plenty of Sir Kensingtons.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
This Moscow, you say he's a character?
Oh yeah, this guy's a total character. We like got kicked out of the Harvard Club today because you're not allowed to bring outside food. And like Howard Moskowitz is like cursing at this guy who's like running the club, and we went around the corner to this like little Greek diner, and he's there just spitting all this wisdom at us, and like he's like, "Oh, this ketchup, like the Scoville units on it are probably like 1,500." We're just shoveling it in his mouth, and we were doing this R&D batch yesterday, and we gave it to him, and he's like guessing the ingredients. He's like nailing it. He's like, "Oh, there's capsaicin in this," and I'm like, "Yeah, how the hell do you know that?" But he's nuts. He's totally nuts.
He's a super. Somebody told me this. I thought it was joking, but he's like super taster.
Super tasters, yeah.
Is he? I guess he's one of those.
He's
Are
not.
these real?
He's not a super taster. Super taster is someone that has basically like an exponentially greater density of taste buds and flavor receptors on their tongue than normal people, so they can pick up very subtle flavors and they taste things very intensely.
I was just wondering what this process has been for you, personally speaking. Like, I imagine you've had to, make a huge investment of your personal time, and I was just wondering, like, from that first cook until now, is this something that you've anticipated your success and also,
Did not anticipate the success. We're also still like very small. Like we're not like successful yet. But I guess it's the journey is a reward. But I mean, it has been extremely humbling. There's nothing like creating something that is trying to change habits. It's very, very humbling. And that's a great, great process. It's an excellent lesson because it teaches you just so much about dealing with people, working with people. I meet so many different types of people every day. Everything from investors to manufacturers to crazy Harvard professors who were like telling me the Scoville units on a tomato sauce. Like that's great. So I've definitely been able to meet like a ton of very interesting people. But to me, I don't want to say it's like effortless, but it's just sort of like intuitive, and that's just me, like that's just my personality, is I really feel way more comfortable doing my own thing than sort of working in another company, which is where I was before.
Two questions. One, how have people reacted to the British nature? And then you said you're changing your packaging. Are you user testing, or how do you figure out what changes work?
Yeah, that second question is a big one. The British thing, people have fun with it, I would say. People typically, they like it, they get it, they kind of understand it. British people surprisingly really like it. That being said, there is a tension between Kensington, who appears to be an industrialist, and Sir Kensington's Ketchup, which is a 21st century all-natural food product. And so that sometimes there's a tension there because he almost looks like he could be like, like a coal mining, guy, like a Rockefeller or a Heinz, exactly. And so it's funny because when we launched, like I said, we were like sort of very highbrow and very naive. and we were all like, oh, this is so postmodern. Like, this is so like funny because gourmet scooping ketchup. Because like, what's gourmet ketchup? Like, and then people started like, so it sort of started as like a conceptual art project, and then it turned into a business. And then so there's definitely a tension there, and we're in the process of resolving that tension. But that's another thing, you're always gonna piss somebody off, and that's fine. You know, you just can't piss off the people that are gonna carry your business forward. In terms of user testing, absolutely. So both on the flavor side, you know, we're going to actually in the next 2 months throw a ketchup party where we take some of the new R&D samples that we have and work on developing those and hearing what people say and getting the feedback and understanding what the segments look like. And then in terms of the actual packaging, we're going to let the design process work. We're going to do some testing. We're going to test with kids. We're going to test on the tables of restaurants. We're going to test on, we're going to look at people's behavior on store shelves. But at the end of the day, for me, it's about being really confident about something just on a personal level and putting it out there. Because you can't over-test. Like, analysis is paralysis.
Did you have to change the recipe when you went from a kitchen to a factory? And if so, how? And
You still cook it at home, right? Like.
We went through a process, and we gave them our original recipe, and we tasted about 10 different prototypes until it was what we thought was good. The taste is always going to change when you move like that. We didn't really change the ingredients, but we changed their quantities, we changed their sourcing, that kind of thing. But it's a fairly, you know, it's a process that takes time, but it's not like a black magic. It's pretty straightforward.
Is there regulation? Like, do you have to, I don't know, is there like FDA approval?
There's surprisingly little regulation.
Not surprised at all.
Really?
Yeah, you know, you do have to, I mean, we never had to like submit our product to the FDA.
What?
Yeah. You have to abide by the regulation. It's sort of like taxes, right? Like you can get audited, but you don't like bring your taxes to a guy and he's like, yeah, this looks good, you know? And so you have to follow the rules, which is like you have to put all the ingredients on there. You have to put the net weight. You have to put the country of origin.
But it's not like approved, but it's not checked.
Right, it's not checked.
What? It's crazy.
Yeah.
So,
And then also our facility though is an FDA approved facility. It has different like safety certifications, but it's not like the FDA is there for every run. You know,
So you
food
gotta sneak
is
some stuff in.
food is something in America. I mean, food is dirty. in this
so do you
country.
not trust when you go to, you know, when you go to?
I trust food because I know it doesn't make me sick. You know, like short-term sick. I trust, like, you know, I mean, I've traveled a lot in my life and I've eaten like in pretty raw places, and you know, I have to say like it's fine because our bodies are used to it. Like we can eat things that aren't super clean.
Right.
Like, you know,
Where do you make the product?
in Amish country, Pennsylvania.
Oh, nice. And the bottle is China.
The little bottles are China, and the big bottles are made in New Jersey. Yeah. The little bottles are custom mold. They have a little mustache on the bottom. We couldn't find those domestically.
And that's because it's a promotion. In other words, you want that because it's promotional. You can make a lot of them also because of that. Or
It doesn't have to do with scale so much. Yeah, primarily with cost and availability.
How long would you consider to be in the early adopter phase? Because you've been working for 2 years.
Yeah, I would say we're in the, we're still in the early adopter phase. You know, we're not anywhere near the top of that peak. Are you familiar with the term crossing the chasm?
Yep.
So we're right now like crossing the chasm. So what we're doing now, like changing Sir Kensington to like be more, you know, kind of like mainstream friendly, changing the bottle to look a little bit more like a ketchup bottle, creating an iconic image that's Sir Kensington's and says ketchup without saying Heinz. That process is crossing the chasm.
so, like the biggest branding like feat is being able to create a really strong, like desirable brand, but then to scale it to the mainstream, right? So like Apple's done that. They have really strong following. It's a very strong brand, but it's also the biggest company in the world. Starbucks is arguably like let that slip a little bit, right? Because Starbucks brand is not as strong as it was 7 years ago, let's say. Are there other brands that like we don't necessarily like think of like that way that you admire that you're like modeling?
Oh yeah. That's a tough one. You know, I don't think we were modeling the brand after anything. I think there were brands that we definitely respected. A lot of them were kind of like obscure.
Right.
And frankly, for me, the brands that are the strongest are the ones that are very different than the product we create. I like, you know, IKEA is one of my favorite brands. It's sort of like low price, easily explained, like good design for everyone. That's kind of like the opposite of my product, which is like ornate. You know, I'm also like a huge fan of Uniqlo's brand, which is like basically IKEA for clothing plus like a little bit of swag. Also not my brand, you know. So I would have to say that like I respect a lot of brands and I study brands, and there are a lot of like great bulletproof brands out there, but I wouldn't say that we modeled our brand after anything. Actually, that's not true. I think that Hendrix is a brand that we looked at very closely. Hendrix Gin. You guys know that?
Oh yeah.
And I think do you guys
What
know
is that?
Saint Germain elderflower liqueur? Saint Germain is another brand. These are relatively, you know, they're not Apple or anything like that, but we thought about that.
You know, so it's interesting because in the tech business, like if you're in the ketchup business, or let's say you're in the water business, because water is a commodity, we can agree on it, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, like Smart Water is like expertly branded to feel premium, and it sells for 3 times the price as the Walgreens brand thing, right? It's just different branding.
It's also a different product because it's not spring water; it's vapor distilled. And so that's very important when you're actually making the sales pitch.
But that's marketing, right? It's the branding of it. It's not the product. You can't tell the difference if you put both in front of someone.
Chemically, there's no difference.
But in other words, if you put it in front of someone and didn't have the brand on it, they wouldn't be able to tell
Okay, true.
the difference, right?
Yeah, true.
In tech, no businesses are really built that way yet because we're at the point where people are doing, like the differentiator is not brand for a lot of the case. It's very much like functionality. But as tech matures, as the internet matures, you end up, the brand matters a lot, right? But even the strongest internet brands were not crafted the way that you're crafting your brand because you're doing it extremely thoughtfully. If you think about the strongest internet brands, a company like Google, Facebook, these guys didn't think about their logo. They didn't think about like the attitude that was coming across. It was very organic almost. So it came about off of it.
It's about function and utility.
Right. But that's also what like the brand means, right? So
well, I mean, when someone is interacting with a brand like mine or like Smart Waters, it's about public display. Right. So if I'm buying something in Ketchup and I'm having a dinner party and I want to show that I have a nice like family and like that I'm like well-to-do, I'll put Sir Kensington on the table. If I want to like go into my meeting and it seems like I'm an innovator and that I am also well-to-do, I'll get like Smart Water, right? So that signals something about you. It's different with technology because you're not doing something to fulfill your own ego in a way, or you do it in a very different way.
Oh, I mean, this kind of does that, right?
But again, like that's very different. Well, I mean, but then that's
It's not quite the internet brand though.
Yeah.
Well, like Instagram versus every other.
Right,
photo.
Instagram.
right, so that's the reality.
Yeah.
There is a point where there two things provide the same exact service.
Yeah.
Right?
Even
And
Pinterest, I think, does really well on the brand versus like there's a lot of bookmarking sites.
But the
Pinterest
other
never
thing is there
says
are lots
it's
of
a bookmarking
other sort of variables, right? Like Pinterest has a network.
Yeah.
That's-
Well, I mean, they
But
built. I think
but
they
I
built
think
the
the
network.
point about that is that
I
it's a
carry this
physical
around.
good.
Exactly, and
It's a
people see it,
physical good.
right? If I'm checking Facebook, I'm not doing that so people behind me say, "Ooh, he's on Facebook." You know?
Yeah.
Carry an iPhone around, it's like, "Oh yeah, he's."
Yeah, but then again, if you are building a photo app and you brand it photos with Facebook, you automatically leverage that Facebook brand for your photos app, right? So
In the early days, there actually was a strong Facebook effect that way, right? right? If you were like, if someone went to your page at your school or searched for you and you weren't on there, you were like clearly the one that was
That's,
left
it says
out.
like that's
It was
like virtual display.
yeah, it was a virtual display, but it was like a very similar sort of idea.
One of the topics on, because we're internet people, is like you have a pretty cool website. Have there
It's gonna
been-
get better.
Okay, cool. Because the question is like, have you guys already done internet campaigns? Because it sounds like kind of like a brand that would really pick up like
Right.
across easily on Reddit, because it's like a demographic that would be like, oh, highbrow, haha, like they would really like connect with the idea, like the college idea that you guys had originally, and then as well, you know, even like on Pinterest, kind of like this thing where you I don't know. I think Pinterest is one of the things that people don't realize how powerful it is yet.
Very powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you sell a lot on the internet?
We sell a little bit on the internet. Our business goes retail, food service, direct to consumer. We are going to be launching more features, like a subscription model, kind of having like a component of our business of what Dollar Shave Club did. But internet campaigns for a consumer brand like mine, where people, it's like just throwing money into the wind. You know, if you're actually paying for eyeballs, like in my business, the conversion rates are low, and I can spend my money in a store and get a much better ROI on that.
Right.
Or I can hire salespeople to go out and like hit the streets and actually get long-term relationships. On the internet, it's like just no, you know, it's much tougher. But we're gonna start doing more with that.
It's like you could get lucky and get that viral video. And is that something that you guys are? It's sort of luck, and sort of like Dollar Shave Club is like the perfect example of they made a video.
I mean, the viral videos are just so hard to get
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
You know.
So what's interesting though is like when you're in the supermarket and you pick up the bottle, you can feel it and you can see it, but you're not tasting it, right? So it's not like whereas when you go to a clothing store, it's hard to do internet sales because when people go to clothing stores, they try the shirt on. You can't do that on the internet. But with like I would imagine with a ketchup, you'd actually be a fairly easy thing to buy online.
It's different though, because people don't think about going to like individual
Right.
websites for grocery shopping. So maybe I can get the consumer once, but can I get them repeatedly?
Mhm.
And that's why the reason for the subscription model.
Right, right.
So that someone can say, all right, I'm buying this, and I can put them on autopilot.
To your point about habits, right? Most people just don't buy groceries online in general.
Exactly.
Right, at all. Like
Yeah.
much less from a single site. Like even
Yeah.
Amazon and all these other sites are
Yeah.
trying to do it fresh direct.
And we work with Fresh Direct, you know, that's sort of our approach to that.
Is that on Amazon?
Amazon, it is on Amazon, but it's sort of like in a weird way on Amazon. Amazon is sometimes like hard to work with because their customer or their vendor support is basically non-existent. So if there's some issue, then it just takes months to resolve.
How do you guys test for repeat customers? Like, do you know if people are buying it again?
Not in stores, but online we do. There are very few ways to do that. Coke has done it with like My Coke Rewards, but finding loyalty programs for packaged consumer goods is tough.
Isn't that like a huge thing now? Because you want this to become a new habit.
Absolutely.
That's why grocery stores have so many value cards,
Right.
so that they know.
They know.
They can tell them.
They don't
Yeah.
pass any of that information along. You know.
Unless you pay for it.
You can't buy that information from grocery stores.
Are there other signals that you can say, oh, well, yeah, I think it's working here, even if you don't know empirically? that
Well,
it's
you
working?
can tell we know how many people are buying in Whole Foods, but we don't know who they are. So we can see that velocity is increasing month on month, and that's how we know it's working.
How does like the process of actually getting into these stores work? Was it like you got into one and then that person knew someone and they just recommended you to someone else, or you like look on LinkedIn and find like the buyer at
For
Target
the
and call
stores,
them up?
trade shows are a big piece of it, and there's a buying process. So like there's a review season for condiments for Whole Foods, and you have to submit during that period, and we have like a broker that knows exactly when that is and knows who the contact is, and so that's sort of how it works. And the Target buyer came to our booth at a show.
How big was your sales team when you were first starting off? Was it like just a few people and you were going to these stores directly, or?
Less than just a few people. Way less than that. Our sales team now is not even a few people.
Yeah.
It's Mark and I, my co-founder. We did everything up until like 9 months ago, and then we hired a retail sales and production manager, and now we have a marketing manager, and also we just hired a restaurant salesperson. So to date, it's been he and I who have closed every restaurant sale.
So how did you prioritize where to go first? Like, I know you said you started off at Murray's Cheese and then like
Yeah.
Chelsea Market, and those are individual stores.
If it comes down to anyone who will listen,
Yeah.
anyone who will listen, anyone who will return your phone calls or emails. Yeah.
How did you decide?
Well, you want to go to places like the Four Seasons and the St. Regis
Yeah.
and the Palace. So you want to hit the luxury segment. Then you want to hit like all the nice restaurants in the West Village, the places that get the most press, the places where like celebrities eat, which are all, of course, the hardest people to sell to because
Right.
everyone's trying to sell to them. But they're the ones, they're your early adopter. You know, they're the ones that people look to as a leader in the market. So we work with ABC Kitchen. We work with a place called Peel's. Has anyone been to Peel's?
I've seen the Ketchup there. I
Yeah.
actually, that was like a thing. I was like, oh yeah, they serve it at Peel's.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to mention Sir Kensington.
And yeah, and
Wow.
Freeman's, which is part of which is Peel's sister restaurant.
Did you always make money when you'd sell the first ones, or did you do it at a loss to get Murray's or?
To date, I think we have like maybe, of all our customers, you know, over 2,000 customers, I think you can count our lost customers on two hands. So we don't really sell at a loss, gross margin wise. Net margin wise is a different story, but gross margin wise, we don't sell at a loss.
We were talking about incentive. What's like the incentive for your early adopting restaurant?
That's actually that's the $600,000 question, is what is the incentive, and it's different for each one. So on some of them, like let's say they have like a big thing of Heinz that they're serving, or like a bottle of Heinz on the table, and they can calculate that their usage is X. If we can use our special branded ramekins to portion control, then maybe they'll save money, and that's an incentive. And chefs, I don't know if you know this, but the less that they spend on food, the higher their salary is.
Oh really?
So they're incentivized to use the lowest quality products. Not a joke.
Is this across all?
Across the board,
Is your
any
price-
sophisticated restaurant.
Is the product just generally cheaper though, or is it just portion control?
Our product, our product is more expensive, so it's portion
To the
control.
restaurant as well? It's
Yeah.
more expensive?
Than Heinz.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean Heinz is made from literally the cheapest stuff on the planet.
No, but I'm surprised, like, when you're first starting out, or, you know, you weren't doing it at a lower margin.
In my business, you can't get into that. You can't sell at a loss.
Right, no, because it's also it's not healthy to compete on price.
Exactly. You can't, because Heinz could go to them and say, okay, we're dropping the price, and then we're out.
You're in a price war.
When Heinz goes to my customers now, if they were ever to, they say, oh, well, we'll lower your price. I don't care, this stuff's more expensive. It's not about the price.
Right.
You don't want to compete on price.
Yep.
What's
You all nod your heads, but I heard that your product is free.
Yeah.
You know, it's really interesting. I actually think that all the theories and laws of marketing, some of them apply, but they're when you talk about internet products, like a lot of other things factor in, and I think it's not nearly as well studied because it's such a nascent industry, and I think that so for one, price is totally different paradigm on the internet. People don't expect to pay for Facebook, and people won't even think to pay for Facebook. And so, in other words, it's just a different world. And I think we have an intuition for it, but I don't think it's not nearly as academic as it is with, because
I agree for the most part. I do want to talk to you guys
Yeah.
offline when you start to approach institutions.
Well, that's right,
Because institutions, they don't see this as an internet product.
Sure.
They see this as just a line item on there, like whatever.
Yeah, and also when you were talking about pricing, when you said the person in the store checks to see if they could afford it, but they also if it's higher price than Heinz, it communicates this is better.
Definitely.
So the
Which
price,
is very different than internet.
but pricing in and of itself is a whole science, right? And I think the truth is people don't get pricing on the internet yet. It's not.
Where you see, I think, pricing on the internet, both art and science, is in packages. So when you've got when you go to look at what kind of web hosting, there's
Right.
good,
The
better,
premium,
best, right? This is science, and
Yeah.
there's lots of A/B testing around that.
Right.
And the fact that I use the blue pen makes a very big difference than if I were to use the red pen.
Yeah. But that's also, that concept is like framing, right? So you have a cheap price and then a high price, and then more likely to buy the middle one, versus if you only had two, people would likely choose the cheaper one.
Right.
But that's an offline concept that was ported online.
Right.
I think we're gonna see lots of stuff that could only be done online, but we haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you do see it. I mean, obviously, this is also offline, but goes online, which is subscriptions.
Right.
Right. Like subscriptions, it's harder to convince them to subscribe, but once you've got them, you've got them.
Yeah.
So if you can, you should make people subscribe.
Depending on your churn rate, right? I mean, churn rate's like the biggest factor in every subscription.
He's starting a subscription
Yeah.
business.
What is the subscription? Coffee?
It's a book company.
Oh.
So we essentially have a similar like giant institutional sales process of like selling into Random House and convincing them to give us our books. And what we find is like the most interesting thing is less. So like like before you can even get in the door, you have to have a reason why like the institution as a whole is better off. But like to get over those habits, it's finding like the individual person in the organization that has some incentive to work with you. So it's like the up and coming person. Like,
Yeah, totally.
Been like by far our biggest thing.
Do you have to like live the part?
Oh yeah.
And that mustache too.
This is the
Yeah, the mustache. This thing doesn't, this just started growing. Yeah, I sort of have to live the part. I mean, sort of. Like, I live more the part of the founder than I do of like the Sir Kensington. Like, I mean, that's sort of an open-ended question, but I'd say yeah, I live the part.
It's interesting because, like, on one hand, it's supposed to be like this hipstery, highbrow, like brand, but on the other hand, like, you guys are clearly very savvy business people, right? Which is like and if you look at all like the strongest, best brands that have grown, it's that like combination of like taste plus savvy, right?
Yeah. And it's surrounding yourself with similar people. Too.
Right.
You have to find people. I mean, one of our muses is an investor and former entrepreneur and our board member, and he embodies that combination of cultural savviness and basically enterprise intelligence, like together.
Who is he?
He's a guy named Keith Miller, and he's on the board of Intermix, Rosa Mexicano. He's a partner at a private equity firm. He, for like 15 years out of college, printed and sold T-shirts to what used to be a small clothing company called The Gap. And so he's great. He knows like everybody.
So you mentioned for a long time it was you and Mark, and you talked about the size of the team now. Why not throw gas on the fire? Like, why not get 10 salespeople in New York talking to every restaurant?
Because we haven't cracked the code. We don't have a value proposition for restaurants that we've thrown fuel on the retail fire.
Mm-hmm.
For the restaurant fire, we don't have a good reason for restaurants to switch yet. Restaurants primarily switch because they like us and they like the ketchup enough to take a hit on their profitability. But we need to figure out a way to help restaurants understand that increasing the quality of their food will also increase their profitability. And that's the project that we're going under now.
How many conversations does it usually take? I mean, is there a lot of collateral, or is it like you setting up like 3 meetings?
Depends. It can be 1 meeting or 2 meetings, and it can be 5 meetings, 10 meetings.
one of the things is how do you hire is basically what the question would be.
How do we hire?
I'm not going to go into a spiel.
I would say we hire we hire equally for positions and people. We have an open position, but if someone doesn't have a ton of experience in that particular position, then we're still open to hiring them. We look for people that have in their own field, whatever they have done, they've excelled very quickly, and they're still on the up ramp, so they haven't reached a plateau yet. And also someone that's just done the same thing and gotten better and better and better at it and been continuously promoted, rather than someone that's gone from role to role. We also, when we interview people, we ask them very straightforward, do you think you do a good job at this? And if they're like, absolutely, then you know that they're good. And if they're like, yeah, I think this is a good straight. You're like, all right, thank you. We need passionate, intelligent people. Another thing that I like to do when interviewing people is ask them to explain something to me that I don't understand. So something fairly gnarly and specific in whatever they've been doing, and break that down for me, and that see their communication skills. But, we also hire slowly and fire quickly.
You're in like the food industry, and so I'd imagine that there are a lot of people who are not Ivy League educated, smart people, or whatever it
Yes.
is. What's it like, sort of?
It's a big piece of what I do.
No, by that I mean that
No, you're absolutely
it's
right.
an industry where the lowest common denominator person is not very sophisticated, right?
Right, yeah. I mean, that's going back to what I was saying about like the type of people that I interact with. I mean, the people that I sell to don't use email on a computer.
Right.
So the people I sell to only have their phones. So they text message and maybe they'll read an email, but you can't expect them to respond. You in my business, you just turn up. You don't necessarily like the people that I sell to. They're not like, oh, let me see on my Outlook or my Google Calendar where there's time. Like they don't have any idea of that kind of thing. They have lunch service and dinner service.
So what's that like from your perspective?
It's very rattling. It's very it's the most emotionally draining part of my life, which is the fact that the people that I'm trying to get to say yes, I have to learn just exactly what I learned about my consumers, which is I need to break my own habits, and I need to make it easy for them, and I need to go when they're free, communicate how they like to communicate. Which is briefly and over text message and occasionally with dirty jokes. Yeah. Very un-PC is the restaurant model.
Did you come to New York to start the company?
Yeah. I was previously living in Tokyo. I was working actually at Lehman Brothers, and that collapsed, and I went to a Japanese bank. And then I worked there for a while, and then I traveled around Asia on a folding bicycle and wrote a blog with a friend of mine. And then we had already obviously started Sir Kensington in college, but then decided during that, okay, let's do this full time with my other friend. So I settled here. Yeah. I didn't think I'd like it, but I love New York. It's great.
Where you from?
I'm originally from San Francisco area where I'm from.
What types of investors invest in the business?
Like mine?
Yeah.
Well, at first there's friends, family, and fools. And then right now we have one institutional investor that strictly manages the wealth of self-made entrepreneurs. So they don't take any other institutional money, they don't take inherited money, and they don't use leverage. And then we have a number of institutional investors who invest personally. One of my investors is, he started a company that brokers 90% of the celebrity talent that brands use. So if you saw Jennifer Aniston in a vitamin water ad, or Beyonce in a DirecTV ad, or these Jay-Z Duracell ads, he did all that stuff. So he brings celebrities and brands together. Another one of my investors actually was the chief marketing officer of Smart Water and Vitamin Water and sold it to Coke. I have an investor who's a partner at a private equity firm that focuses on technology. What else? Just a variety of people. And then, what else do we have in this round?
Sorry to interrupt, how do you get the investments from it sounds like a range of people. How do you approach them? I assume they answer emails.
Yeah, they answer emails. That's one really dangerous thing is that it's a lot easier to raise money than it is to get customers. So you have to make sure that you do it very carefully. You start with your network. And then it's a very small world. Especially in the consumer goods community, it's a very small world. Technology, there's so much more money chasing opportunities, but in my world, it's fairly small. So one person knows another person knows another person knows another person, and that's kind of how it goes. And the way that you do it is by being very straightforward, very professional, and putting together materials that are just very easy to read and compelling. And also showing traction. Traction is the number one thing that people look for.
Is it a status? Have people invested, do you think, because of a status thing? Because it's cool to have a unique,
a little bit.
Gourmet ketchup in your portfolio.
There's definitely that appeal,
Yeah.
but that would be the vast minority of our
Do
investors.
you worry about that?
No.
As long as you get the money.
No, I would say that it's not such a big thing for me that I don't have a reason to worry about it. Restaurants get a lot of that. I mean, I have friends
Right.
that have restaurants and they have people that it's just a vanity investment.
Right.
They just want to come sit at the corner table.
Right.
You know, it's to them it's an inconsequential amount of money because they run like a gigantic hedge fund, and so they just want to have status in society. So they invest in a restaurant where they're taken care of. But in my business, it's we definitely said no to people. Let's put it that way.
How much
People
have
that
you
don't have
raised?
value. To date, we've raised close to $3 million.
Any big screw ups or funny stories?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest screw up we have is by hiring someone who is really experienced and then subsequently firing them. And I have not heard or seen the weirdest shit before I met this guy. And we thought he was going to be good, but basically, like, we would go in meetings with him in Las Vegas where he would just start talking in front of the customer about, like, this infection that he got this weekend. He was, came into the shower and my wife was like, what's that? You know, it was just unbelievable.
How long do you last?
He lasted 5 weeks. Lasted 5 weeks. And what else? What are the kind of weird stories? Or screw-ups?
Disappointments.
What about icing?
Oh yeah. Well, we have a little tradition, which is, you guys familiar with icing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have this one guy, our retail and production manager, and every time we go to a trade show, we have like one of the interns slip a Smirnoff Ice into something. Like, oh, like, can you help me with this display? And he's like, oh, I'll help you with that. And they're like, oh God. And he has to do it to ice. In our office, whenever anyone either opens up a new restaurant, so gets a restaurant to switch to Sir Kensington's, or they sell a pallet of ketchup, there's a gong, and people ring the gong.
That's cool.
Yeah.
It's a Zappos thing, right?
Is it? Cool. I didn't read that book yet, but
Yeah, I saw they have.
I learned
this
that from another
huge
guy.
gong.
yeah, that's cool.
What's something you never, like something that just blew your mind when like, oh, this piece of the world works that way? I feel like you hit those things where, just like something you didn't see coming.
Well, I mean, I went to a production facility yesterday. The food that's produced there feeds 10 million people a day. So I mean, they're producing 600 jars a minute of pasta sauce. And what's really interesting is you learn, when you're in physical production, not in technology, in physical production, you realize what goes on behind closed doors, how there's this incredible concentration of activity, of creating like all this pasta sauce, which is going to like all the Walmarts and like all the Costco's and like every supermarket, and is being shipped like all around the world, and it's all coming from one facility. And that all came from, you know, a series of farms that grow from the same seed. And so you see basically in America we have this great sort of like monotonization of what we consume.
Are you gonna go from a strategic perspective, like extremely deep on ketchup, or are you gonna start doing, like you said, mayonnaise, you know, mustards?
There's a lot of work to be done in ketchup, and the number one killer of small businesses or of new businesses is the lack of focus.
Yep.
And so it's very tough for us to say no to mayo and mustard for a long time because people say, I would take your ketchup if I had a matching mustard and mayo.
Yeah.
So it's sort of yet to be seen. But we want to nail ketchup, and we're
You
gonna
want to be
spend.
known as the ketchup company?
Yeah. We want to be known as the people that revolutionize the hardest thing to revolutionize.
Have you had to make any compromise? I imagine that's actually inevitable, but can you talk about any compromises you've had to make?
Thankfully, no major ones. You know, the product quality, while we've been able to drop the price, has not changed. So that's a great one. You know, being able to use the same ingredients but just make it more efficient. Being able to drop costs like that. But we're in the process now of figuring out, okay, do we want to change the formula to lower the price and or to make the same price but a bigger volume? But we've made really no major compromises.
But sometimes you make compromises like with your investors or with a restaurant on a price or something like that.
I would say that's very I would call those negotiations. So I assume you meant compromises to the product, but
I
maybe.
mean, I just think in general when you're starting a business, you have idealistic ideas about how it's gonna work. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in the product quality, we don't make compromises, but yeah, absolutely. There have been times where we wanted to hire someone and they're just too expensive, and so we have to say no. There have been definitely times when we go out there and with an investor, they want terms and we want a different set of terms, and we need to go through a negotiation and get to yes or say no. And so there are definitely compromises in that way. I mean, everything's a conversation.
When you look at like, so like beverages, to me sticks out as like where branding matters most, there's also like incredible variety of beverages, right? You go to a deli and there's 100 different things, but also, and it's like self-expression. You buy vitamin water and not a Gatorade and it says something about you. But it's also like a purchase you're gonna make several times a day almost. Like people buy a drink sometimes many times in one day. Like people buy ketchup once a month, right?
In consumer businesses, beverages are where the money are. So the only reason why we're creating a ketchup is because it's a market with really one major player. And so if we were in the mustard category, it'd be the same thing.
Right.
With low velocity products, you're right, it doesn't make sense. The difference is that vitamin water doesn't sell to a restaurant.
Right.
And we sell more peels in a day does what Whole Foods down the street on the Bowery does in a month, or it does in a week, for example. So, or like it's about 20 times more. So like one Whole Foods, or like 20 Whole Foods is equal to one restaurant. And so and like they're not serving vitamin water on Virgin America, or they're not giving it away at least. And so our product, it's a giveaway in food service, and 70% of ketchup is consumed in restaurants. So that gives you an idea of how important they are.
I think
Is that
everyone.
because isn't there a lot of waste of ketchup in restaurants?
Yeah, there's a lot of waste. There's a lot of waste to everything.
But
There's
less
a lot
so
of
than
waste.
like at home, right? If I have a jar, I'll probably keep
Right,
it.
exactly. Yeah.
Do they refill? Are you worried about them refilling with
They do refill.
Kensington ketchup?
Oh no, they don't. That we don't worry about that.
Because I always think like, is this really Heinz? Sometimes you think maybe.
What else would it be?
Really shitty restaurant.
It's or Cisco brand, or Red Gold, or Hunt's. Yeah, there are a lot of people that refill Heinz with other imitations. Yeah, but ours is so different.
You don't have like
And we have
features out there.
our
going,
product
"Hey,
is so different that it's not like the chef's not gonna like try and pull a fast one. And like, but we also have relationships that prevent that from happening.
And that's also a reason why like you wouldn't want to just use a commodity ketchup and you want to really differentiate the product itself, right?
I mean, we would never be able to get a yes out of someone if it was the same product. Because chefs don't care about brand, really. The restaurateur does, but the chef
Do you
doesn't.
think that from a taste perspective, it appeals the same way Heinz does to the average American consumer?
No, and that's a big habit thing.
Right.
We know the Heinz taste because we've had it all our lives. A new ketchup is like something, some are called blasphemy. Some people don't like it because it's too new. So it's very different. So it still hits all the balance of flavor, but it's very different.
Can I eat your ketchup with steak?
Yeah. Actually, there's a restaurant called Burger and Barrel, which is on Mercer Street in Houston, and they have a sirloin there that comes with Sir Kensington spice.
All right. Well, thank you
Cool.
so much. This has been